Petty's success had the Ford boys licking their wounds and looking for answers. One move was to start a new team under the direction of Fred Lorenzen. Lorenzen's choice for his new driver, Bobby Allison.
The phone rang and I answered, and this voice that I recognized said, "You're going to get a call in 2 minutes. The answer is yes, goodbye." And I realized it was Ralph Moody that had called. And I said, you know, why is he aggravating me? We're here working, you know, and it's hot and I'm sweating and we've got a lot of work to do. Why is he aggravating me? But I hung the phone up. Sure enough, it rang again. And Fred Lorenzen, this is Fred Lorenzen. Ford gave me a car. Will you drive it at Rockingham? Sure, yeah. I know the answer. The answer is yes.
Allison won that race at Rockingham and the following race as well. For 1968, Ford loaded the big cannon. Leroy Yarborough would drive Junior Johnson's number 26, and Cale Yarborough was in the seat of the number 21 Wood Brothers Mercury.
Well, Cale was just a hell for leather guy. He was always been out of shape, sideways and half turned over. I mean, this Cale Yarborough got in a car, it got the socks drove off of it because his idols was Turner and Baker and Weatherly and Fireball. That was his idols, and he had to do just like they done, and that's what made him good.
Cale drove his slope-backed Montego into victory lane 6 times. Included were wins in the Daytona 500, Virginia 500, and the Southern 500. But Ford's best Petty killer came once again from the shops of Holman Moody. The marksman was David Pearson.
You know, he's the type of guy who never very seldom tore a car up or got in a problem, even short track or anything else. You know, just about always brought it home, you know, running.
And Pearson was probably one of the smoothest drivers. At Darlington, you ever watch everybody go into number one corner, try to drive in too deep, and you watch Pearson, he'd back off a little earlier, be smooth getting in the corner, and he'd get off faster, so the rest of the racetrack was faster because he got out of the corner better.
Petty and Pearson finished the season in a dead heat. Each had 16 wins with only one on a superspeedway. Pearson won at Darlington and Petty at Rockingham. But it was Pearson who was more consistent and Pearson who collected the NASCAR championship. The fight for the '68 crown wasn't the first or last duel between Petty and Pearson. For years, their on-track bouts were the main event at every race.
There's nobody run first and second to each other more times than we have. In fact, we've run first and second to each other more times than most people's won races. I think he beat me 33 times and I beat him 31 times or something like that. You know what I mean? So that's 60-some races there that we won between us, and we was first and second in those races. So again, from a competitor standpoint, I never felt like that there was anybody that could do a better job in a race car than David Pearson could do, because he could win on any kind of racetrack, and anywhere you went, he was the one you had to beat.
Most of Ford's success in '68 had come with the new fastback Torinos and Mercury Montegos. They were the first successful attempt by a manufacturer to build cars with racing in mind.
I think the rules were that you had to make as many or offer as many as 500 to the public. Well, that wouldn't even be one for each dealer around the country for it to be eligible for NASCAR competition. Of course, the manufacturers took advantage of that. They'd build those 500 and sell them as muscle cars, but they were not mass-produced cars, but they were designed for race cars.
Seeing the dominance of the aerodynamic Fords, Richard Petty did the unthinkable.
And at that time, they was building the wing Dodge, and Mercury and Ford had the slope-back cars and different front ends on the cars, so they were building a special car. Plymouth was going to have to run a stock car, and I said, ain't no way that I can run a stock car against all these modified body cars. And they said, well, I said, you're a Plymouth driver and you work for us, and that's what you're going to do. And I said, well, I won't work for you. If I can't have a Dodge, then I'll go somewhere else. And they said, go. So that's what we done. We went across the street and talked to Ford, and they said, fine.
Petty wheeled his Ford to victory 9 times in 1969, while arch-rival Pearson won 11 and took his 3rd Grand National Championship. Without the powerful Petty, Chrysler was in trouble. It was September before they finally unveiled their winged Dodge Daytona. More importantly, Chrysler announced that a Plymouth version, the Superbird, would be ready for 1970, and one of them would go to Richard Petty.
The Superbird was a great race car. Wasn't too good at Martinsville or a quarter-mile racetrack and stuff, but anytime you got it on a mile or bigger where the wind resistance and wind drag and the wing made the car handle, it was a super race car.
Chrysler won 38 of the 48 races held in 1970, although not all were in the exotic winged cars. The first winner in a Superbird wasn't Richard Petty after all. It was Petty's teammate, Pete Hamilton. He passed David Pearson with only 9 laps left to win the Daytona 500. But the most successful of the winged cars wasn't blue. It was the red K&K Dodge of Bobby Isaac. Isaac picked up 11 wins and almost $200,000 on the way to his first and only Grand National Championship. The win came just in time for renowned crew chief Harry Hyde.
Well, I had told my boss, he had asked me about winning a championship in NASCAR, and I told him I thought it'd take 5 years. And he said, well, you got 5 years, that's all. If you win a championship, we'll go on. If you don't, we'll stop. Well, I accomplished that. I won the championship in 5 years.
Along with the new, faster cars came a fresh batch of places to race them.
In the late 60s and 69 and along in there are quite a few speedways being built. Texas World Speedway came into existence a year or so in that area. Also up in Michigan, the Michigan International Speedway was built.
The most exciting addition to the schedule came in September of 1969 with the opening of the Alabama International Motor Speedway, the largest and fastest racetrack in the world.
You know, they built Talladega, and it was a very, very fast racetrack, and especially with the Hemis and the engines that they had in those cars pulling 620 to 25 horsepower. The speeds were excess of 200 miles an hour, right at it, 200 miles an hour. And Goodyear didn't have a tire that could run that kind of speed. So anyway, they went down to practice and qualify and all this, and they'd run a few laps, and then the tires would come apart.
I've seen tires go through the windshield and go out the back windows, go through the grills and knock the radiators back in the engine. You know, the whole cap would come off the tires. And you're sitting out there running 200 miles an hour and just tear up anything it hit.
The tire problem became the first grievance taken up by the new Professional Drivers Association. Made up of most of the top drivers, the organization had been formed a month earlier with Richard Petty as president.
That had been going on, not really going on, but been talked about for a long time. The purses were very, very poor. Circumstances that we had to run under were very primitive, you know what I mean? No place to change clothes, no place, no showers, no decent bathrooms for us or our crews or families.
The PDA informed Bill France they wouldn't race until the tire problems were solved.
Oh, they had all the drivers with France and Billy France and 2 or 3 other people there in the biggest argument you ever saw in the pit area. And Cale jumping up and down and all those guys, Cale and a whole bunch of them. Say, what the hell, you think we're nuts, you know?
Complicating matters for NASCAR was the tremendous pre-race buildup. Even Bill France himself got back in a race car and turned a lap of 175 miles an hour to promote his new track.
And this France here, he's got a crowd there and everything else, and they're going to boycott and not run. I guess he was mad. Imagine trying to give all those people their money back. They boycotted a race? Wow. He had reason to be mad.
What they did at that time, apologized to the people that were there and told them that they're not going to see the race they came to see. And if you hang on to your ticket stub, you can redeem it here or at Daytona before the race here next year, and we'll honor those tickets with another ticket. That was a bold statement.
As the PDA members began leaving, France filled their spots with smaller cars from the Grand Touring division. Only 13 Grand National cars remained. Only 2 were factory rides. One, the K&K Dodge of Bobby Isaac.
I called my boss, Nard Croscott. He's dead now. And I said, what do you want me to do? These guys are pulling out here, and it's Saturday evening. It's starting to get dark, and they're loading up the big boys are pulling out. One right after the other headed out the gate. He said, you stay and race. And if nobody's on that racetrack but you race.
The other factory car was the Ray Nichols Dodge, driven by Richard Brickhouse. Brickhouse had accepted the ride the day before when Charlie Glotzback joined the boycott. Brickhouse went on to win his first and only Grand National race in the very first Talladega 500.
It wasn't long after the Talladega walkout that PDA was busted. I guess they got to Petty first through sponsors and all, but it's not going to work. You know, having a driver's association is proven. You can't get 10 drivers in a room and come up with anything that's going to satisfy any two.
As for Talladega's new track, its troubled start was no indication of the future. Goodyear solved the tire problem, and NASCAR improved safety even more by mandating carburetor restrictor plates. For the Alabama 500 in 1970, all the big names were back. Pete Hamilton followed up on his Daytona triumph with another win in the Petty Superbird. Racing headlines during the 60s had been dominated by the Big Three, and so had the results on the track.
Factory support then seemed to be almost more important than the driver. If you had factory support, you could win a race. But if you had factory support and a good driver, you just won more of them.
Since re-entering the sport in '62, the factories had introduced the Hemi, the overhead cam, and the muscle cars. Their battles with NASCAR resulted in boycotts and bad press, but also moved stock car racing towards the future. Strangely, the car maker's role in that future would be limited. Before the '71 season, Chrysler sharply curtailed its NASCAR effort, and Ford got out of racing altogether.
They got into all that pollution factor that the government was jumping up and down about. And I guess the biggest thing is with the government hollering about all they were doing was spend a bunch of money racing, and they weren't spending the money taking care of the pollution factor.
They have picked some bad people to represent them that had the wrong concept of racing, that never did get out of Detroit till they sent them down here to look this racing over, and they didn't understand it. And they wouldn't listen to a common guy like myself, or maybe Dave Marcus, or maybe Junior Johnson or somebody. They didn't do that. No, they figured it all out themselves. And so they picked up their marbles and went home. And when they did, France let them go.
The factory's departure left a huge financial void, a space immediately filled by the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company.
The number one highlight in the 1970s was R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company coming in as the sponsor of the sport and bringing sports marketing to the sport. I mean, that has opened up so many avenues and still continues to do so today.
Just before the '71 season began, NASCAR announced that RJR's Winston cigarette brand would sponsor a $100,000 point fund. The money would be distributed to the top 20 drivers in the new Winston Cup Series, all the Grand National races of 250 miles or more. More importantly, RJR brought marketing expertise into stock car racing.
They really worked at it. They did it. They not only just promoted NASCAR, they helped every track in the country, whether it was a short track like Wilkesboro that draws maybe 25,000 fans at that time, to Daytona where they draw 100,000. The best I remember, they were the first to have a show car. It didn't look like a race car in those days. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of that first Winston Cup car. It looked like just plexiglass and an engine and a platform on it and a running board for Miss Winston to stand on, and maybe one of the drivers that rode around in the parade lap.
We couldn't race without sponsorship, so NASCAR and France and all the other promoters sort of got into the deal and started getting all the different racers sponsors and this stuff. So this is what started the where we have now, you know, $1 million sponsors to run the races right today.
Reynolds did a lot for the sport because they did put a lot of money in it in the early days. But in doing so, within 3 years, I think that got corporate America's attention to say, hey, R.J. Reynolds, one of the biggest companies in the country, is interested in stock car racing. And I think that got the attention in a lot of boardrooms around the country.
Perhaps it was appropriate that the first NASCAR Winston Cup crown went to the King. One of only 2 remaining drivers with direct factory support, Petty won 21 races, including his 3rd Daytona 500.